Hey everyone, just a quick video to go over 4.1 this week. I made the slideshow. I guess that's just how my brain works these days. So why not? Here we go. Let's jump into creation and ownership. So the first part of the assignment is to reflect on the week's readings. And I was really immersed in the readings, and I'm also a nap time warrior. So when my son is down, I'm doing my grad work. And I thought the easiest way to share what I found important and interesting and relevant to my work was to just kind of take a series of images and share them with you. So the first one, I used Canva to take a quote that really stuck out to me from the Gabora article. And in it, she just said, in our high stimulation environment, children spend so much time processing new stimuli that there is less time to go deep with their stimuli they've already encountered. And this was the first quote that just stood right out to me because this is exactly what I've encountered in both my personal life, working with children, my nieces, my nephews, my own child. I think that we live in a high stimulation world where there's so much media, there's so much available to us, but we don't really ask people to go deep. We do sound bites from the news and then people think they're experts. We do quick Google searches and we go, oh, I saw that on Wikipedia. I know everything about it now. And truly, we don't require people to go deeper. So I think, especially as a social studies teacher, my job is to really shine a light on things and to push people to really go deeper and think more in depth about topics and skills and processes and different things. So I kind of took this quote as a way to think about what am I doing with kids and where do I want to push them? The next image is one that I took from Teach Thought's article, and what I really liked about it was this idea of moving students from consumers to contributors. And I think that that really highlights 21st century learning. So I actually want to take this image and put it up in my classroom because I think that it's really good to have visual models for students to be thinking about where they are on the continuum, kind of like Schlechty's continuum of engagement. But I think that the traditional model of education, where we're passively asking students to be engaged, but not really asking them to do anything beyond recalling their information, is really obsolete. And I think a lot of students want to be contributors, but they just need some of that fundamental background information. They need a little they need a little bit more support and guidance on how to do so ethically in a way that allows them to safely contribute. You know, I'm working with minors. I do not want them putting their personal information out there. I don't want them putting their image out there. And our school has a lot of rules about that. So I can definitely be the person who supports and facilitates them as they make that journey into creators and contributors. And then I went old school and made a Wordle because as I was reading all of the articles, I was like, how am I going to find 2 to 3 things to really share? And I don't know if anyone else runs into information overload. And so what I did is I just kept a running list of words and put little check marks next to them as I saw them. And then it was really fun to kind of play around with the Wordle and kind of look at the different ways I could arrange the words and think about what is the most important for students learning in my classroom? What are the words that I want to share with them? And although real world is way too small, I do like this idea of creative attention, motivation, engagement. I really love the idea of a makerspace. And I also think emotions are important and evaluation. So those are the words that I went in and made bigger. But I think for students to see something like this would really be helpful. A lot of the articles talked about how could we increase student engagement? How can we motivate them to do their best work? How can we get them to be creative? How can we teach them how to manage a workflow? And that stuff is all really important. And so moving forward, what's a really useful tool for me is I made this an image on my background of my desktop, one of them, and I'm just going to kind of keep looking at it as I start doing the planning process for the capstone. And I'm also going to start meeting with a colleague next week and looking at some PBL work that we're putting together. How can we move the needle forward for kids and for ourselves into more 21st century learning? All right, the second part of the assignment asks us to share an assignment, and that's why I think the video is just easier, so I can just show you what I am talking about. I guess I'm a visual person. But I picked my Egyptian Museum exhibit assignment. This is a really fun activity. Traditionally, Egypt is one of the favorite topics we study all year. We talk about mummification, magic, politics, gender, identity, all sorts of different things that eighth graders are fascinated by. But the big overarching theme of the project is, what were the major achievements of the Egyptians? And pick one topic related to the Egyptians. A lot of people pick pyramids, mummification. Sometimes they pick specific deities, or they might look at more specifically at gender. But they pick a topic related to ancient Egypt, and we do a traditional research project that culminates in a choice product, and I'll show you more about that in a moment. So this is my lesson that I also use to teach them about the research process. And so I have, if you want to click the link to check out the full project, you're welcome to. I have a note catcher, I have the rubric, I have all sorts of choice activities if they can't come up with one on their own. But this activity creates a lot of engagement because of the content, and it creates a lot of empowerment because of the choice. So how does this activity foster autonomy, awareness, and ownership? I'm going to do something that I never do in classes, but because I'm narrating, I'm just going to read to you. So for autonomy, students are required to select a topic and create an artifact. There's no wrong answer as long as it's related to ancient Egypt. I've set up clear parameters that you'll see in the rubric that really set students up for success. I also use peer review in teacher meetings as a way to help students be more aware of what they're doing. So we'll have a research work period where I walk students through the research process. We have another research period, and during that time I start to pull students one-on-one, and I just ask them, hey, what are you doing? What resources are you using? Can I be helpful? And it's in those small conversations that I'm often able to push kids to do a little bit of better work, because I'll say, hey, this is great, but you should go talk to so-and-so. They're doing the same topic and they've got a great resource for you. Or, oh, I notice you're not really taking notes. Do you need to do a voice file? Like, well, how can we make this work for you? And just that engagement can support awareness. And the last piece of ownership is, by the end of the project, we have a museum exhibit presentation, and each student gives a 2 to 3 minute presentation, and then we have a classroom gallery walk, and we look and interact with all the artifacts. And this is a chance for a lot of students to shine. And unfortunately, this is a chance when students who don't put in the effort and really engage in the assignment, it really shows, because they don't have a product that they're really proud of. And although I hate when that happens, and I stay with kids after school and I try really hard to support them and I call home, truthfully, failure is also an important part of that learning journey for that child. And sometimes it's okay to let kids fail and then process it and talk to them about, hey, what went wrong and what could we do differently next time? I don't believe in rubber stamping failure and saying, you suck, move on. I think it's more important to have a conversation of, this wasn't so successful. Why do you think that was? And that's when a lot of growth can occur, especially in the middle school. So looking at my rubric, the single point rubric is my way to go. And I love it because this is a conversation. So my learning targets are very specific. Can you take notes? Are you demonstrating your knowledge? And I have that very vague on history, because you might demonstrate your knowledge in a lot of different ways. So I don't want to spell out exactly what that looks like, because that stems, or it just ruins the creativity, I think. I do ask them to do some traditional writing, and I give a very specific 200 to 500 word requirement. I ask them to cite their sources, but then for the presentation, I can create a visual representation of my knowledge. And then I give them a timeline with responsibility. I don't care what your artifact looks like. It could be digital, it could be in print, it could be an interpretive dance. I've had live mummification reenactments with fake blood and organs. I love all of it, but they gotta make something. And the comment section is where the student can tell me, hey, Mrs. Norwood, this is what I was going for. Unfortunately, I don't have the art skills to make this happen. Or, hey, I was so surprised I was able to make a scale model of blah. It's really helpful to have the comment section. And then evaluating creativity is like, oh, I just am very cautious. I've learned over the years that creativity is objective, and you're setting yourself and students up for failure if you're too explicit about what creativity looks like. So I use general terminology. I give lots of exemplars of what different projects have looked like over the years, and I set really loose parameters so I can set students up for success. This was a big old question, so let me just think for a second here. I give exemplars to kind of distinguish between good and quote bad work. Um, but I also keep my learning targets pretty specific when it comes to skills and very broad when it comes to creativity. So they have to meet that basic criteria, but it's not out of this need for compliance. It's about, hey, you have to have certain skills. You can't just pass off somebody else's research and work as your own. You have to cite your source. And I think that students are very aware of that in my classroom because we have that conversation a lot. And you might have noticed I'm a verbal processor. I'm a talker. So I have my ideas when I start talking. So a lot of times with my students in class, they might ask a question that I hadn't anticipated when I designed the activity. And so we're able to kind of construct what's going on. I account for creativity in my lesson plans because I think about choice. For me, creativity has a lot to do with choice, but I try to be really fair with students. And at the end of the day, I question them of, were you able to produce something based on what you learned? Were you able to do what you set out to do? And for me, a student who can set a goal and accomplish it is always successful. Then I went back with my activity and I looked at the student standards and the educator standards from ITSE. And so for the student standards, I'm not going to read it all to you. You can pause this and check it out. But I think that this project hits empowerment. It hits the digital citizen, the knowledge constructor, and creative communicator. I think that there's definitely a lot of room for this to go further and deeper using technology. But I also believe in, paper crafts, hands-on activities, and so there has to be a balance. So for this activity, I'm pushing a lot of the digital research skills, and I'm pushing a lot of the digital citizenship skills. And I try to find resources that are like universal design, like maybe we've got a YouTube video they can watch, maybe we've got a website like Ducksters that can read to them. But then I'm also asking students to do something independently that they find interesting. So I don't want to say they have to make a website or they have to make a video when really they just want to paint a tomb wall. For the teacher side of things, I looked at leader, citizen, and designer. As a leader, I try to find resources that allow for all students to use them. So for example, I talked about Ducksters.com because they have a read aloud feature. I'm always looking for equitable access to technology and content, and I think my students don't know that. For citizenship, I try to promote curiosity with the research process. I get excited with students. I want to talk to them. I use a lot of different types of media in my presentations with students. I have a digital website, virtual presence that I'm always working on getting better at. I cite all my sources as much as I can, and I require students to do that as well. And I model it, and I'll share something sometimes and be like, I didn't do this the best I could. I got to go back and fix it. But I think the best you can do is the best you can do, and you hold everyone, including yourself, to that standard. And then as far as the designer, I try really hard to create content and to create units that allow for students to find who they are and how they need to learn and to get what they need to get out of it. I think it's really hard to design individualized learning for 90 plus students. And I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you're trying to write 10 different lesson plans for one day. Instead, I think you should have a really broad lesson plan that you can then adapt in the moment for kids as they need it. How might I improve this activity? So I love my museum exhibit project. It's so much fun, but one thing I've always wished I could do is to take it further and make a global audience. Maybe that means that we open up and have an open house night where students set up a real museum exhibit. We could invite curators and museum directors from the community to help design it. We've got the Farnsworth in town. Like, we've got the resources to do it here in Camden. So we could take it deeper in that way, and I think that might have more of a real world buy-in for students. But, right now I like it a lot, and I also think that students should decide, this is a unit where I am teaching these basic skills, and then we do a project very similar to it when we study China. And so I'm not sure if adding the real world component right away would make them so nervous that they couldn't produce their best work. So that's something to talk to the kids about before I took it further. And then lastly, here are my references. Thanks for listening. I look forward to talking to you in the comments.